women of Irish birth and women who have ended up in Ireland through trafficking. She's currently the Chief Executive Officer with Ruhuma. It's a non-governmental organisation which is working with women affected by prostitution, including victims of sex trafficking. And prior to this role, she was for 7 years manager of the National Domestic Violence Helpline with Women's Aid. So you know all of these women have worked collectively together and their organisations all very much interact. She has extensive experience of work in the community and voluntary sector in Ireland and abroad, working particularly with marginalised ethnic minority women and youth. She has a Bachelor of Arts from University College Dublin and a Master of Philosophy in Gender and Women's Studies from Trinity College. She is a passionate advocate of human rights, social justice and equality, particularly for women and girls. And she has been working very, very hard in Ruhuma against the odds, because when you work with very marginalised people in this extremely corrupt little country, you don't really get much of a hearing. I mean, I think that some of you will have had a chance to hear the news this morning or have a glance at the newspapers and really the sorts of amounts of money which were squandered in this country on corruption and on personal gain by politicians would have seriously made a dent in the problem of violence against women if they had been directed in that way. Every single woman on this platform struggles with low budgets, with dealing with causes which are so manifestly in need of a bit of resourcing, and they're just not getting that. So the theme that we've been given for the panel is stopping the violence. So I think that our panel members will talk about the problem, they will outline the problem as they perceived it through their work, but they'll also try to address what needs to be done to bring an end to that violence. So I'm going to ask each of the speakers to speak for about 6 minutes, or not more than 6 minutes I should say, and then I will ask them some questions arising from what they've said, and then we'll bring the audience in, because we're all very, very interested to hear about your own knowledge and experience of these issues, as well as questions that you may have to put to individual members of the panel. So I'm going to ask Sarah to start off with, and then we'll go through the panel, and they'll each have about half an hour of people speaking to you. So if you maybe want to take a few notes on what they say, and they can all talk to you afterwards then. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Susan, and thanks very much for having us today, particularly Eileen for inviting us all to speak. It's a wonderful opportunity to address an international audience, because particularly in respect of the work that Ruhuma does, it touches a very international and diverse group of women. Ruhuma, just briefly expanding on what Susan has said, has been operating in Ireland since 1989, and our specific and unique focus is to work to support women affected by prostitution, and since 2000 when we first encountered it as an issue, victims of sex trafficking. The work that we do is primarily frontline in nature. We have outreach supports to women. We're the only NGO that offers what's referred to as an exiting model to support women who are seeking to exit the sex trade, with very practical and emotional supports to do so. And again, the complex recovery process for victims of trafficking is the model of work that we engage in. We also are a lobbying and advocating organisation, and so in terms of legislative change, that will make a meaningful difference for the women and girls we work with. That's a key part of what we do. In practical terms, we have a street outreach service. We have a van that goes out to the more referred to as the red light districts for those women who are involved in street prostitution. We do one-to-one casework, emotional support, advocacy, accompaniment through the justice system. We also offer very practical responses. We have professional career guidance service, education, development, one-to-one classes. We have small grants for women to engage in education in the community. And we also do resettlement work supporting women, particularly those coming through the asylum process and the migrant system here, in finding and settling into new homes. The women that we work with are very, very diverse. They include Irish women, but a huge proportion would be migrant women, and in 2010 we worked with 31 different nationalities. These would be women who were either actively involved in prostitution, women trying to exit, women with a past experience, and then of course victims of trafficking also. It just gives you a kind of flavour of, I mean, what is still a relatively homogenous population in this country in respect to sex trade. That's not the case at all. It's extremely diverse in terms of the reach of the different countries and continents from which women arrive at our shores to be involved in the sex trade or to be forced into the sex trade. In terms of prostitution and trafficking, it's an ongoing discussion. We work with women who fall into what are kind of referred to as possibly victim of trafficking or women in prostitution. I suppose for us, what is most stark in our work is actually the similarities between the two. There's a huge overlap in terms of women's experience just once they're involved in the sex trade. The push factors which tend to draw women into the sex trade in terms of prostitution are, for the vast majority, a background of poverty, a lack of perhaps educational opportunities, very particularly a lack of other support such as family supports, and an experience of some form of neglect or abuse or violence, and particularly early sexualization tend to be strong features for women who find themselves involved in prostitution, and equally those are the features for women who are targeted by traffickers. It's a pre-existing situation of vulnerability which is targeted and which they very explicitly seek out. In terms of trafficking as a phenomenon, I think it's important to say that trafficking is not new. It's always been there. It never went away. It is something that, in terms of slavery, since back millennia, people have been bought and sold. What has happened now, thankfully, is that the international community is now recognising it as such. It is becoming a criminal offence. Unfortunately, in Ireland, while we've been working with migrant victims of trafficking since the year 2000, it was only recognised as a crime of law in the year 2008. And so up to that point, despite the horrendous experiences of the women and girls we worked with, there was no official crime being committed against them. I think what has happened, though, is as a world we have experienced huge globalisation, migration paths have opened up, and the sex trade itself has become far more normalised and prevalent, and that has certainly encouraged traffickers to further exploit and import women into the country, although you're not required to actually travel across the border, and we have in fact victims of Irish victims of trafficking also, and in some countries such as Lithuania, the majority of their victims of trafficking are actually nationals of that country. I will probably sit down now because I'm sure that there'll be questions that might go into a little bit more depth, but just to conclude in terms of the idea of positive change, there are a lot of things that we can do. There are a lot of things happening, and there has been good progress in respect of responding to women in prostitution and victims of trafficking. Legislation certainly needs to catch up, and that's something we would be strongly involved in, indeed with some of the partners at the table here. And again, we actually do have very strong practical and positive outcomes for a lot of the women we work with. So what we find is once supports are put in place, and assistance, even sometimes very small assistance, there are amazing outcomes for women and their children. And we have women who are at third level now, we have women who have set up their homes, got married, and managed to move on positively with their lives. And so, just to conclude on that note, while women go through extraordinary deprivation and abuse, where even the smallest supports are put in place, they can have very, very positive outcomes for the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I'd like to call on Margaret now, and we'll run through the Women Who Run organisations first, I think.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me here.